grab you. I think Callie, go live with Callie. There we go. And this should be working in just one moment. And then we're
Yeah,
going to start chatting. Yay! Oh, I'm always so paranoid that these things don't work. So
I
hooray!
panic when that happens because I never quite know where to look or what to press.
Oh yes, and we actually had our like we're wrapping up our teacher training last night, and I was like, "We'll do Zoom rooms; they'll be easy," and it didn't work, and so yeah, so I'm extra paranoid. But anyways, here we are. Thank you, Callie. Thank you, Callie, for arriving. And let me do a quick introduction to you for everybody that's watching this now and watching this later, in case you don't already know this beautiful woman right here. This is Kallie Schut, Schut, Schut.
Gut.
Yeah, okay, Scut,
Yeah,
Scut. So it's a hard
it's Dutch. It's Dutch.
I know. So anyway, so she, you would also maybe know her as Rebel Yoga Tribe at your Rebel Yoga Tribe. So follow her. It wouldn't let me when I put the title in. It wouldn't let me tag your thing. So anyways, well, I'll tag you in the comments so people can find you. We're here. She's a yoga teacher. She's an amazing, well, amazing instructor, educator, heart-centered woman who I just finished her cultural appropriation course, a 10-hour course in yoga, colonialism, very big topics. And this is where I'm really excited to have Kallie talk to us here live to the interwebs on social media and talk more about this because we need more. And Kallie just does it in such a beautiful way. So anyways, so that's my big introduction for you. Is there anything that you'd like to share with us before we dive in?
No, that's fine. I always like to position myself before we start because I think
Yeah.
that helps people to understand how I'm located. So, my heritage is South Asian, Indian heritage, and my family are from the north, the region called Punjab, up in the north west of India. And it was the region that was partitioned. My family heritage are the faith systems that we practice in my family are Sikhism and Hinduism, and we just draw in lots of the richness of the faith systems and belief systems that like inform Indian life all over. So, and I'm second generation, so I live now in London. So my parents migrated to the UK in the 1960s. So I was born in the UK. So I'm a child of the diaspora.
Hmm. Yeah, wonderful. And thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And well, we had chatted briefly saying, okay, where should we take this? And there's so much to take this and to talk about. So I'm happy to kind of let this evolve as we had discussed a bit. But just, I think in a yoga context in our modern world, I love seeing more and more conversations coming up around, ooh, that light is really nice, beautiful. Um, no, it's good. I like it. The creative director in me was like, nice shot. Yeah, like I love seeing more and more conversations and awareness of awakening around appropriation, like decolonizing our yoga practice, waking up to that sort of even that like just white neoliberal mindset of I'm this is my individual practice and it's only for me and I'm just going to pray and meditate on the world and that's not going to really get us too far, especially in the world that we're in now. So Callie, is there anything that, let's just jump into the deep waters of wonderful.
Very excited because I get really impassioned about how yoga has journeyed to the West and the way in which we use yoga as a very personal practice. And it is a personal practice, but this personal practice, which is for the individual, is now available and taken into public spaces, and it's offered up as with monetary value attached to it. So something that is deeply personal and spiritual, designed for individuals, is now out and available in public spaces. And then it takes on a very different nature and different character. And that's why there's been so much kind of conversation, and rightly so, about what is the meaning of yoga, who is defining yoga, who has a sense of ownership over yoga, and is yoga in any way still connected to the roots of the source culture from which it comes. And there's been this disconnection between way we practice yoga in the home for our individual selves, and the way that yoga is practiced and taught in yoga spaces, on yoga teacher trainings and so on. So this is about finding a way that we can integrate the deeply spiritual wisdom tradition that has been gifted from India with the way that it is commodified, branded, packaged, and diluted in the West. So there has to be a place in the middle where we can all meet in harmony and unity. At the moment, there's a lot of conflict around the practice of yoga, and people are taking up space and claiming yoga as their own, whether it is white-centered yoga spaces in London, or whether it is Hindus who are devout and sort of ascribe to the Modi politics in India. There's a sense of like this culture grab and hoarding happening in yoga. And so really my kind of the purpose of the course that which you joined is to try and find a place where we can talk about where there's harm in yoga, where there's the value in yoga, and how can we use yoga in a way that reflects our own deeply held convictions and ethics, but that doesn't cause harm or trigger trauma in those from whom this culture and practice and religion and faith and belief system derivates from. So, and it's a tricky path to navigate. You know, it's really complex, and people are coming to it with their own motivations. And I like to classify those as like really good motivations, where it's inclusive and it's for liberation of the individual as well as the collective, or it's kind of like bad in the way that it's commodified, or in the way that it is abused and misused to cause harm to people. So it's like, how do we veer away from the harm into this place of healing and wellness, which is why it found its way to the West, but it seems to have got lost. And how can we go back to the practice, and how can we honor the practice? How can we honor and include the voices of Black and brown yogis, particularly of South Asian heritage? How can we give a space and center these voices who have been for so long marginalized, and stripped of their identity and stripped of their culture in this way? So it's like, it is a big topic, like you said, Brew. It is like huge, and it's not, it requires skill in having these conversations. It invites critical self-awareness. It invites us to challenge our own thinking, challenge the way that we practice, challenge how we honor yoga. And by taking that reflective look at our practice through these critical lenses of colonialism, of critical race theory, of identity politics, it helps us to kind of navigate this path in a way that's really honest about how we might be appropriating or how we might be appreciating yoga. But we have to understand the self within the cultural context and then relate it to yoga. What we've done is we've kind of bypassed our own filters, barriers, systems, perspectives, lenses that we all wear, and somehow have magicked ourselves into salvation without having done any of the work, without recognizing those people who have done the work. So let's kind of reroute ourselves back towards yoga.
All of that, all of that. It's just the words that keeps going in my mind. It's just like we're swimming in water that we don't even realize we're swimming in. And when we don't put the cultural context, and then and as you're saying, when yoga doesn't just appear in a vacuum, it's not just like we're welcome to yoga. It is not, it doesn't have any influence outside of our culture. It's not, and I love how you say magic our way, because I think it is really presented on some level in that it's like this magical practice that somehow is over, that's not affected by everything in this world and the structures and the people who are also so wrapped up in the structures of the world. So I think this is it. This is absolutely it. This I makes me very excited and makes me very wonderful to hear you say these things, and especially from your perspective and experience, like it's huge, huge. And all yoga practitioners, like, may this be may this be the now, and may this be the future of our practice, that we
Yeah.
really see our cultural connections within that.
We've all come we've all come to the practice by different pathways. And most of us come to yoga because we're searching for either the physical health benefits of the practice or the mental health benefits, where we can begin to release those repetitive thought patterns that we have. Or we come to it because it's a lifestyle choice. So it's really, whichever reason we come to yoga, once we're there, let's find a way of discovering its true essence and its significance for us beyond our own personal healing. So rather, and I think this is one of the things, what happens is we turn inward and we begin to gaze at our navel. So we literally, this pratyahara that we have, we turn inward, and then we become blind to all of the pain and suffering that is not only within us, but to those around us. So we kind of start working on our addictions. We start working on, kind of our bad relationships and our negative character traits that we have. And we use all of the yogic skills and knowledge to do that. And then we do nothing more with it. And so what I'm inviting yogis to do is to take that self-healing and that way of looking at ourselves, to take it beyond yourself into your community. Because many of us know that unless we are all free, none of us are free. Unless we are all free of suffering, none of us are free of suffering. So we have a social responsibility because we live in a social world. And we know of the legacy of racism and colonialism. So if we look back over 400 years and we look, what happens is we all go back to, yoga's been around for 5,000 years. But it's been in the West for about 100 years. And in between those, immediately preceding those 100 years, there was a horrific history of colonialism. And yoga came to the West in the same way that all of the other resources were extracted from the East, from Africa, in terms of the natural wealth and resource of those lands, the people of those lands, the traditions of those lands. They have come here in the same way that the spices arrived here. They came here in the same way that coffee and tea arrived here. Yoga arrived in the same way that silks arrived here in the West. These weren't necessarily given up willingly. These were extracted and hoarded and removed from their source and then sold in the West for profit. And unfortunately, we all think yoga is something special and outside of all other things are extracted. But wisdom traditions are extracted in the same way. And so once we begin to look at yoga in the way that actually, is this an extracted resource? Is this the wealth of a nation that has been removed and brought here and sold to serve the purpose of the West? And if we begin to take that critical lens on yoga and we begin to look at the harm that colonialism caused, we'll begin to understand the yoga that we're practicing. So when yoga was in India, yoga was informed by this multi-system of faiths. There's a plethora of faiths. There's a pluralism about yoga. So it's not just one religion that informs yoga practice. There's different faith systems that inform yoga. And all of that was stripped out when it arrived here. So the most dominant culture that it came with was with Hinduism. So Hinduism is a dominant culture that informed yoga practice under the colonial period. And then when it was extracted, that's what came with it. But not just any form of Hinduism, because Hinduism itself is a branch, it's a tree with 100 branches and 100 roots. It picked out the Brahmin Vedic interpretation. And so we get sort of something that's quite classist and hierarchical in Indian society, extracted because it aligns with Christian Western values. And then it came here. So we have a very narrow view of yoga itself anyway, which removes all of the richness of India and South Asia that informed it. So our understanding needs to open up and broaden out and kind of have this sort of 3D view of it, rather than this kind of like, okay, it came from India, but it's rooted in Hinduism. But if we understand it's rooted in Brahman patriarchy, and that there was caste system and caste discrimination, and we understand how that served colonialism, then we begin to understand that actually we may be perpetuating harm inadvertently, unintentionally, because we don't know the history. We haven't informed ourselves of this, the modern history of yoga. We haven't informed ourselves of what happened in 400 years since the British went over to India. What happened when the East India Company arrived there and began to take power and began to occupy parts of India? What happened when the British Raj took official control over India? Education, all of the systems that codified learning in India began to be in English. And key documents were destroyed and suppressed. Anything that encouraged or enabled the Indian people to rise up in rebellion or to resist British rule, those kind of callings were suppressed. And yoga is one of those callings. So in yoga, it's a call for action. Karma yoga, Kriya yoga, is a call for action. So you work on the self, but you also respond to this call for action. So when we read the Bhagavad Gita, this is a poem about going into battle, about strengthening and enriching yourself in order to resist oppression. And yet that kind of knowledge and understanding has been stripped away from modern yoga. So I really invite people to think about yoga in this sort of, especially in the times that we live in now with Black Lives Matter and a greater understanding of the impact of racism, to know that yoga itself is a tool which can overcome systemic racism.
It's interesting, and in all of that, everything that you just said, especially the very interesting point, an important point about the Brahmin patriarchal, like this is, yoga was this big tapestry, and then what we're getting is still in line with that patriarchal caste system. Whew, that alone is a beautiful, not beautiful, but like a really important thing to unpack. But even just contextualizing that a little bit when you said about the Bhagavad Gita, and that's such if you're in a more traditional yoga teacher training, it's like everybody read the Bhagavad Gita, and it's always, in my experience, has been presented in a way that it's like the battle is with yourself and the battle is with your own internal. So again, it's that same reinforcing of that story of not taking it further enough, and again, not having even understanding that within this greater context of where this text came from and the evolution of that. Like this is, oh man.
And if you think about it, the yoga is about the internal struggle. So there's the kleshas, internal suffering. So in order for us to karmically, so South Asia, the faith systems are about believing in reincarnation and kind of returning of the soul to the whole consciousness and becoming part of the whole consciousness. But to do that, you overcome your suffering, the burdens that you've acquired in each lifetime. So even if we look at it from the internal struggle, we are not overcoming our internal struggle. So things like racism, systemic racism, we are all part of this system, and we have all ingested racism as a way of life, as a way of looking out at the world. So we have this concept of whiteness and the superiority of whiteness, and we have this concept of everybody else being less than. And so we all, as a brown person, I've ingested that. So my belief system for a long time was that brownness is not as good as whiteness. It doesn't have as much moral value or as much worth or as much heroic integrity about it. And so if we begin to strip away all that we acquire from society, all of the negative thinking, all of these filters, this lens of racism, of patriarchy, of racism, of any prejudice-based system which oppresses a group of people based on their characteristics, these are all things that we've inherited and acquired. And so we need to strip away those. So it's not a personal failing. We focus on our personal failings. We focus on the fact that, I'm insecure and I lack confidence and I want to develop my personal character. What we don't look at is how have the systems treated us and how have we been suppressed and um, oppressed by the systems around us. Our low confidence, is it an internal failing? Is it a fault of mine? No, the reason I have low confidence is because I'm a woman. And I've been taught as a woman that I'm not as good as men, and that in order for me, I have to fit in this role in society. And if I do anything outside this that's not feminine, I will be called a nasty woman, for example. We have to be able to see that is patriarchy that is doing that to men and women. Again, I'm cisgendered. I have my worldview is going to be as a cisgendered woman. But what does that mean for our transgender women? How is their life experience different? How are they oppressed? May I, as a cisgendered woman, be causing that oppression? So these are all things, belief systems that we've acquired. These are all the vrittis we have, thought patterns that we've acquired. So the internal struggle is as much about overcoming our own internal prejudices that we have, that we've ingested from the systems that are around us. None of us are exceptional. We are all shaped by our politics. We're all shaped by our culture. We are all shaped by our position in society. Some of us are closer to positions of privilege and power. Some of us are further away. And those of us who are further away have less power, have less opportunity. We are less able to fulfill our potential. Those who are closest to the power base of privilege, and that might be being white, it might be being male, it might be being heterosexual, it might be being middle class. Any of these systems we look at. And then when we look at modern yoga and we look at who has the most power in modern yoga, to whom is the wealth in modern yoga flowing, who has the greatest influence over yoga, who occupies the spaces in yoga. And on the whole, it tends to be white middle class women, or in terms of looking at some of the leaders, it is white men. Brown women have the least place in yoga in the West. And yet this is a tradition and a culture that we have been grown up. This is a part of our ancestry. This is part of our heritage. And we've lost connection to that. So for me, it's about reclaiming some of that space, and also helping people understand that it's not about making this space exclusive. It is about making these spaces more inclusive, more representative. For those of us who have been marginalized, how can we have an opportunity to be able to hear their voice, hear the wisdom that they have in their DNA, because this is something they've grown up with. This is something that is in generation after generation after generation in their blood. How can we welcome those voices? How can we elevate and give platform to those people who have been marginalized and oppressed? And in that way, we are also overcoming our own internal struggle. We are dealing with our own guilt. We are dealing with our own pain, with our brutalizing effects of history on us as white people. So there's a twofold responsibility we have as part of this struggle in yoga: the self and overcoming our filters, our perceptions, our biases, our bigoted views that we have acquired through no fault of our own in many ways. So that's our individual role. But then also, how can we as a society, as a collective, ensure that everybody has equity, that there is justice and equity for everyone, and especially for those who've lost access and control over their own wisdom traditions. I don't get to define my wisdom tradition anymore. It is defined for me by corporations in the West. And that's where my low confidence might come from. You see, all these things, when we turn around and go, oh, it's my fault, I should be a better human being. It's not that you should be a better human being. We should live in a better society that recognizes the value of all human beings. And how can we do that throughout?
Like, everybody, did you hear that? And can you just like screenshot that in your brains? Like everything you're saying, but that alone, I think just poof, yes. Yes, and the yes, and the yes. All the yeses on that, Kallie. Keep going. You're on a roll.
Hard work, Brie. It is hard work because Well, I've been a yoga teacher. I've been practicing yoga, and when I talk about yoga, it's beyond the yoga asana. It's the whole richness of yoga. Uh, it's my outlook on the world is through this yogic lens. But when I turn to public spaces to kind of practice in a community, I often end up feeling isolated or ostracized. And I've had some really painful experiences of racism within yoga over the last few years. And this is what's driven me to do the work that I do. But it means that when I take an emotional risk every time that I step up and speak about my experience of yoga in the West, um, it makes me very vulnerable. And so I've had to grow my resilience, and I've had to and acquire a deep understanding of the impact of race, the impact of colonialism, and the legacy of those, and really understand how that's affected me as an individual, but also how when I'm having conversations with people and where harm is caused to me, I try to understand that that's many times isn't intentional. And that for me, part of the work that I'm doing is about helping um, our community to better understand each other, to kind of have a shared understanding that we are all being traumatized by racism. We've all been traumatized by colonialism. And so when we practice yoga, if we revisit that trauma upon those people who have suffered in the past through their generational trauma, then how can we be accountable and responsible for that as yoga teachers, and particularly if we are white yoga teachers? If this is not part of our wisdom tradition and we're not part of the source culture, how can we make sure that we honor the practice, but also how can we ensure that we deliver it with sensitivity, knowing that there has been race-based trauma of that source culture, of people who belong to that source culture, knowing that I, as a brown woman, have been separated out from yoga. So when people think yoga, they don't see me, they don't think me. They think a white, skinny woman being able to be really super flexible and super bendy, who's wearing like designer yoga pants. And that's painful for brown yoga teachers, for people of South Asian heritage. It's we have been separated and disconnected from a practice that should should enrich us. That is our pathway to enlightenment. That is our pathway to consciousness. And so we have to navigate like corporate capitalism, and all that, and racism in order to like even access our own tradition.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we move on to cultural appropriation, that's how can we be appreciative? How can we guard this sacred gift and treat it like the treasure that it is? And so some of the work that you and I have been doing, Bree, is around how can we do that in our teachings and in our yoga spaces and in our wherever we are when we talk about yoga and practice yoga. I do talk a lot, Bree. You
Oh
must.
God, I love it. No, 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 no. I have nothing to contribute. I'm just happy to shut up and let you talk. So this isn't my conversation, like I just soak it up every time because it's just like, yeah, keep talking. Well, I had something and then actually, I lost it. So I think you're good. You're just everything yeah.
Like, well, we talk about.
Oh, sorry, I just remembered. May I, because one thing I always find very interesting when we talk about, especially, South Asian women, in the role of teacher and not seeing yourself. And then we have that patriarchal part of it where we see, if we do see a South Asian Indian teacher, it's usually going to be a male. And then when they're in that male role, they're also in not just the role of teacher, but guru, and haven't we seen many misuses of power from both like all male of whatever race, but it's interesting that we don't see a lot of Indian, well, not interesting, we can understand why we don't see a lot of Indian with South Asian women rising up into that same level of teacher. And and this is like, Callie, here you go. Here's my little way of offering this, because we don't need more of those men abusing the power. The energy absolutely changes, especially when we have learning from you. And when we were taking our course, one thing that kept coming into my mind over the whole time was like, for me, having a female South Asian woman holding this space made me realize I've never had that. I've learned from men in India and like gone to the guru and done the thing, but oh, the energy absolutely changes, and we need more of that. It's a different experience with women, and it's a different experience with of women who hold the lineage of the wisdom tradition. So thank you, Kallie, for being vulnerable and doing this work, as you explained how it's not easy and you have to go back and grow that resilience. So thank you for showing up and continuing to do this.
I think you raise a really really kind of key issue here, is about this, and I call it the unholy alliance of male Indian gurus and white women. And this relationship has been corrupted, has been abused, misused. And it's deeply saddening and harmful to, so as an Asian woman, as a South Asian woman, the harm and the abuse that we have seen revealed with the courage of survivors who have stepped forward and spoken with such bravery, knowing that they are these cults that have built up around these gurus, and the following that they have, and the violence in terms of language that will be directed towards incredible survivors who've spoken up. And unfortunately, this unholy alliance has for many years served a purpose. And male Indian gurus realized very quickly the profit and wealth that could be gained from selling spirituality to the West. And then what that did in turn for white women in particular, because of kind of, if you look at the history and you look at the partnerships that were developed over time, it gave them credibility. So they were able to use the spirituality and the credence that having a male Indian guru gave you credibility in order to be able to promote yourself as someone being more spiritual, as more knowledgeable, as being kind of beyond the worldly, beyond the material. And then in those dark shadows, in those places of darkness, much harm has been done. And therefore women, South Asian women like myself, like Susanna Barkataki, Chase Jessel and Tejal of Yoga is Dead. There are so many of us women in the West now who have seen these abuses and think there's been a disservice. There's patriarchy at play. There's this kind of, we need to challenge this patriarchy, because patriarchy is abusing yoga and is doing a disservice to the richness of this tradition. Yoga, as practiced by Indian women and by South Asian women, is a personal practice because they haven't often been given the opportunity to step outside of the home. And therefore it's been a very personal practice. Yet it has built great resilience and gives women great courage. So when you look at the movements around the world that call for social justice and call for the overthrow of any kind of oppressive regime, it is often women. It is women who are leading the way. It is women who are standing tall and it is women who are showing compassion and are showing empathy. And it is often women who are moved to take action and respond to the call for justice. And this richness of this strength and resilience is something that I want to celebrate. And I thank you for giving opportunity for these voices to be heard, because this allyship that we have between white women and Black and brown women is what will kind of help keep us safe. But it will also help us to cultivate the power dynamics that are collaborative, that are collective, rather than power over, which is what we've seen happen in yoga. So to the detriment of the practice, to the detriment and harm of people within that practice. So yeah, I think Indian male gurus need to be watching out behind them because their days are numbered. Rightly so, they're numbered. Uh, and the rise of the voice of the oppressed, of the marginalized, in whichever field, whichever capacity, you know, gay, gay and queer rights, transgender rights, women's rights, the black rights, rights of black and brown people. These are voices that are now coming together in one union. So when we think about yoga as union, for me, this is the union I want to see, is the union of all of these oppressed and marginalized voices rising together to be heard. It is also for our collective liberation, for that moksha that I often talk about, moksha, that collective liberation. Yoga is a liberatory practice. It is to liberate one and all. And we can do that when we come together. So those who have had power for too long and have misused and abused that power, this is no longer the time for them.
Yes. Yes.
Oh,
Oh, absolutely.
yeah.
Um, yeah. And it's an active practice for us all. You know, like it's not just like, so everybody who's watching this, this is, and if you're resonating and if you're listening to Callie going, yeah, 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 and then our conversation will end and you go on with your day and you forget about all this, like A, well, hopefully some seeds have been planted, but B, let's not let this be passive. Let's not just go, yeah, she's right, and then get on our mat and not do anything about it. So like taking those steps, big and small, unpacking them within ourselves. So actually, let's have some. Do you have any, in terms of how, like, I think you've said a lot, and I think you've offered so much. And Callie's Facebook and or what are we on, Instagram page? She's always posting very informative insights around colonialism, patriarchy, all these systems of oppression, and within that yoga context. So continue to go to her site, her Instagram page, and just learn from her, and take her course. And she's also in her teacher training, modern yoga teacher training this year, sharing this stuff. But so I think those are some good actions. But how do we as individuals, as teachers, as people who, and especially for white people who are practicing and teaching this tradition, like, what can we keep doing? And so that's an open-ended question. I'm not necessarily asking you, Callie, now please tell us, educate us all on what to do. Like, I think you've given us a lot, but so that's just my call to remind everybody here, like, this is not just, oh yeah, and then we don't change.
It's like, let's take the yoga off the mat. So we often hear this phrase, don't we? Take your yoga off the mat and take it into your everyday. And I don't think enough of us do that in any real way. And when we do, we sort of take it in these kind of very soft, passive ways, like kindness, be kind, be gentle, we're all one. These kind of all these spiritually bypassing ways that we kind of end up taking yoga into the real world. I'm inviting you to think about looking at yoga through a critical lens. So be critical. Question the voice of whoever is talking to you about yoga. They may claim to be the authority on yoga, but question it, challenge it, triangulate it. So be curious, inquire. So this inquiry is one of the key yoga limbs, is inquiry. So let's go out and be like your svadhyaya, your tapas, is kind of be curious, learn, acquire knowledge, understand it, criticize it, and then come to your own view of it, and a view that resonates with your ethics and your values. So think about what your key values are. What are your ethics as an individual? And then look at how those align with yoga and where they align with yoga. And so you'll firstly be really clear about what you stand for, what you represent, who you are, what your identity is, what your privilege is, and what privilege do I have and how can I use it. So the first practice is really, look at yourself. And then you take all of that brilliance that is you, all of that power that is you, all of that goodness that is you, and then you take it off your mat and you take it into your yoga studios and you take it into your local community. And you start thinking about, well, where is there suffering in my community? How can I karmically live yoga? What my yoga practice is about alleviating suffering. So how can I do that in my community? Can I support my local charities? What are the causes that are meaningful to my community? How can I make life better, more safe, more secure for my neighbor and for my local community? So think about, so I think we haven't interpreted yoga in this way much. It was interpreted in this way. This is how we overcame the British Raj. This
Mm.
is how the movement to overcome the British Raj was yoga. The whole concept of non-violent resistance, that is rooted in yoga. That was a yoga philosophy. It's a yoga tenet. And so let's take that non-violent resistance out into the world and think about what we can do. Honor the practice. So kind of learn about it. Read about the philosophy. If you get to know some South Asian people, like befriend South Asians. They may not want to be your friend, but you know what? Be persistent. Because I often find that if people are really persistent and are determined to be my friend, I will eventually just give up and go, okay, like there must be something about you that you do not give up, and you want to know about my experience, and you want to hear from me, and you want to talk to me, and you want to understand me. So you know what? I'm gonna eventually give you the time to do that. So like be a friend, be an ally to those who need your help. Ask them what they need from you. What can you offer up? What privilege can you share with them? Don't leave the yoga space. So people who have this critical inquiry, this acuity that you're developing, the clarity that you're developing, please don't leave the yoga space. Stay in the yoga space and make the difference within the system. Change it from the inside out, because that's the most change. So at the moment, I've heard conversations about white yoga teachers and white yoga students going, well, I feel like I'm appropriating the practice, so I probably shouldn't be in this space. If you've done the anti-racism work and you've looked at your own seeds of racism within you, and you've looked at the seeds of patriarchy within you, and you're doing the work, then you are the very person who needs to stay in this field, and you are the one who needs to be speaking out and offering up opportunities and converting other white people to this newfound understanding that we all have about what yoga is for. Yoga is for social good. Yoga, not just for your own good. It's not a selfish practice, it's for social good. So my call is really look at your community. What does your community need? Support your local charities, support your neighbours, support your black and brown neighbours in particular. Be an ally. And then think about exploring where you honor the wisdom tradition. How am I honoring the wisdom tradition? Am I divorcing it from its people? And if I'm divorcing it from its people, then I need to know I need to support the people. Practice the wisdom tradition. It has manifold benefits for all of us. But when it's divorced from the people, that's when we need to think about. Let's bring those two together.
Mhm. Mm. It's good and it's big. And, and just so again, if this is new to anybody watching this and hearing, and again, I hope everybody, even if it's not new, I hope everybody's minds and hearts are just going, because this, and if you are feeling any sort of feelings arising out of this, I just want to reflect anybody, if you're on the newer, if you're white and on the newer path of, and new to the path of anti-racism and anti-colonial or decolonizing practices, it's not easy. It's painful. It's, you know, but it's the work. So anyway, sorry. So I just want to reflect that because I think the big emotions that I feel, I just want to show to everybody that this is the yoga, and stick with it, because it's not going to be this love and light experience as we unpack and we learn and we listen to other people's stories and experiences and then have that reflected back and how we may have not known. So anyways, whew, okay. But that, I just, there it is. So here's our reflection of, my reflection of, like, stick with the work and use the yoga that has held you and helped your life to go deeper into these uncomfortable places, and keep listening and hearing and creating space, because this, to me, this is where the change is, and this is where it, like, is
It's
everything.
to Bree, what you're experiencing and what you've been going through in the work, through the work that you've been doing, is the delayering. Because you're essentially deconstructing everything that you've known and everything that you've grown up with and everything that you've learned through your yoga practice. You're deconstructing it. And that deconstruction of the self is can make you feel very vulnerable and very exposed. And then you're in that space and you're thinking, how am I ever going to put myself back together again? Well, what happens as part of this is where the practice is so useful. Your daily practice can really support you through this, is that you begin to reconstruct yourself. And what you do each time you reconstruct yourself, you take away a veil of illusion, you take away a filter that has blinded you, you take away a perspective that has been rose tinted, well, white tinted, let's say. And what happens is, and that process of deconstruction, of delayering the self, is that is the practice of yoga. That is what yoga is for. And so far, many of us have practiced it on a very superficial level, where we've kind of really just looked at our own individual character flaws, and we focus, what we were talking about earlier. What we haven't looked at is how these systems infiltrated my very skin. How have these systems infiltrated my pores, my DNA? This is what I have. This is my legacy. This is my ancestry. This is my heritage is of that of systemic racism, is of colonialism, is of oppression. That is a very painful thing to come to terms with. We often talk about how Black and brown people have been brutalized. But remember that white people have also been brutalized because they've had to numb themselves to the pain of Black and brown people. Otherwise, you are not able to perpetuate these systems. So white people have had to numb themselves to pain and suffering of others in order to be able to live through this. And so there's a brutalizing effect on white people as well. And coming to terms with that, so white people also have ancestral healing to do. You also have work to do to heal yourselves. And yoga is a path for healing. Yoga is a practice for healing. And that's why it's so potent, and that's why it feels, you're for a long time for me, my Anahat chakra here, my Vishuddha chakra, there was just this blockage. I felt like I could not speak, I could not breathe, with the pain and the burden of my wisdom tradition being extracted and appropriated, the impact of racism. It has suffocated us all. And so we need to use the practice to breathe through it, to work through it. And for me, that's why I found my voice. This is where the yoga is what has shaped me as a person. It is what I believe makes me a more compassionate, a kinder, more empathic individual. And there's, this is my route is a karmic journey. My life does not end here. I am going, because of my faith system, I know beyond this is this consciousness. I will be part of the divine consciousness at some point. And all I'm doing now is finding my way there. And I'm very grateful that I have people like you to work with, because I learn about how to do this work in a way that's sensitive to everyone, because that recognizes the pain that all of us bring to this. We all have race-based trauma. Some of us are aware of it, and for some of us it's much deeper, and it has wrenched us. For some of us, we're just beginning to have glimpses of that pain that we have inherited.
And it's big, and but I want to reflect back to again one of the things you said that I think is so true, is so many teachers and like, because I think where you're really re-reflecting is having people who are thinking, well, as a white person I shouldn't take this, like, teach practice, it's not my space, da da da. And I think I just want to re-reflect that, because everything that you're saying is so important, because the practice in of itself is that place of healing, and we need it to be that container as we all unpack and decolonize and reawaken. And I would be lost if I didn't have yoga through this. You know? And then the beautiful thing, it's also because of yoga that I'm even thinking of this. And like so it's not separate. None of this. It's whew, and it's lifelong and lifetimes long.
See, like where we're in a place where the journey for white people in yoga is about restitution and reparation. And that will uncover shame, it will uncover fear, it will uncover all of these dark places that we have inherited. And that's not an easy path, but yoga is the practice that will shine a light upon it. It will illuminate all of the goodness that is within us as well. And for Black and brown people, yoga is a journey of healing. So we're kind of healing, but we're in different places. Rightly because of our histories, we're in different places. But what I would like is not to do this separately, but for us to do this together. Because if we do it together, we have then empathy for each other. And instead of conflict between us, we have harmony between us. There are going to be some hard conversations, and that's what we've been leaning into. There are going to be some hard conversations. There are going to be things that are said that will hurt and that might cause some harm. But we have to have those honest conversations and honest reflections. Otherwise, we end up spiritually bypassing. That's what's been happening in this industry for so long. We've just been looking the other way. And now some of us are beginning to turn and to really cast an eye upon the harm that is in yoga.
Yeah.
We do from a place of knowing that this practice is a sacred gift. And if we trust in the practice and we surrender to the practice and we surrender to this call for action, then what we will leave the next generation is kind of more healing rather than more intergenerational trauma. So we want to rupture and interrupt this generational trauma that we all inherit. And I think the practice does that for us.
Yeah. And we do it with the practice. Like
Yeah.
it's just that it is the practice, it's with the practice supports us. Because I've in all my years of yoga, or life, I don't know anything else that feels more important than this work.
Yeah. You're in that stillness with your mantra, your mudra, your meditation, your asana practice. And you're in that moment. That's where you have the clearest of sight. That's where you have these glimpses of truth, of yourself and of the world in which you live. That clarity that comes from the practice, that glimpse of the divine, that glimpse of consciousness, however you want to interpret that, it happens in those moments when we are at one with our practice, when we are completely absorbed, that we lose the sense of our physical self in the practice, when we drop beyond our physical self in the practice, when we drop beyond this emotional body where all this, these emotions are, when we drop beyond the mental body where we're thinking about it, that's where we can evolve to. That's what this practice, this is why, I think what the work that we can do is amazing. It's phenomenal what we can achieve for ourselves as individuals, but for our communities, for those people who are suffering around us. And that's why we need more of us to practice yoga. We need more of us to teach yoga, but we all need to be like coming from it, from this healing place, from this informed place, from this kind of call for action place, this from social justice, from anti-racism, from anti-patriarchy. All of those systems that cause division and cause chaos, we can use the practice to bring healing there.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, we could talk forever, but I think this is probably.
Take off, taking full breath, using the breath, taking that full breath in to fill the heart space.
Mm-hmm.
Breath in, holding it in, and then releasing it and discharging all that we.
Yeah, because
This is a marathon. This is the long journey ahead.
This is a yeah, but it's and may we, you know, and may I throw in a call, the call to action again. I just like don't just like I don't thank you for that mirroring of the marathon because I think we can get into these sprint feelings where it's like, oh, I'm all caught up and oh, I'm gonna make change, and then we're not wired that way. We can't sustain that layer of work because more stuff needs to get unpacked. So let's yeah, may we all do the marathon of this and not get off the track or get out of the race or the marathon
Conversation.
run.
Yeah, let's not think about it. This is just now because of Black Lives Matters. This is conversations we want to be having going forward for many years in all of our YTTs, in all of our practices, in all of our teachings.
Yes,
Thank
yes, yes. And Callie, again, thank you because as you say, and as you and well, so thank you in so many ways. But again, just anytime for me, anytime I just hear anybody's story and direct experience, it's just this light bulb of just like just awareness. So may we all continue to hear people's stories and direct experiences. I'm happy to continue, man. Can you just talk on my Instagram every day for us? You know? But so we are gonna actually, well, speaking of it, this, we will be saving this. Yes, we'll
Yeah.
go on the news feed. I'll put it in on YouTube and Callie has a YouTube channel as well. She does beautiful healing. So actually, there's a fun call to action. If you're feeling fired up and if you have the time and want to get back into your body, go to Kallie Yoga, or no, sorry, Rebel Yoga Tribe on YouTube. And she's got so many loving yin inspired practices. So get embodied, subscribe to her, do all her practices. Um, yeah, because anyway, so we'll share. Please, everybody share that we have permission to share. I'm assuming. Hey, like if Callie, if
Yeah, sure.
share everybody and their friends and
Yes.
dogs spread this conversation wide.
Yeah, come and do my course with me. Come and practice with me. Find black and brown teachers where you are. Build partnerships. Make collaborations like the one that you and I are going to do. This is how healing takes place when we come together and we work together and we heal together.
Yeah, yeah. Whew. And the difference too of just like being held in so much compassion, you know, and having that collective care and intention just shifts the healing, you know, in that experience. And it's so you again, I think every time I ever talk about you, that's always how I describe you is just being able to hold such, because I know it's not easy and I want to just keep reflecting that back to you. I see that and I honor that and I thank you for standing up and sharing your voice and sharing your experiences because every time I hear you, it's profound and it's important.